Hi, I'm Mark Bates. I'm a biblical theologian who teaches from a Messianic and Second Temple perspective. My journey to faith in Yeshua wasn't straightforward. It began not in pursuit of him, but in opposition to him. Yet, through that opposition, God revealed himself, turning my resistance into loyalty and my questions into calling. So, let's set the stage. Like I said, I'm a biblical theologian. I specialize in teaching from a Messianic and Second Temple perspective. I don't consider myself to be a pastor, uh, and I don't envision myself being a pastor. I'm not getting up every week giving a sermon. Right? My job is to teach hard truths in hard Bible theology settings. That teaching will be from a Messianic perspective, which simply means I'm a Jewish believer in Yeshua, Jesus as the Messiah, right? But that does shape the way I see certain things. And also definitely deeply from a second temple period perspective. Now, this is very important. Jesus and all of the apostles, all of the writers of the New Testament, lived in the second temple period. Their context was second temple period. Everything that they wrote, the background to it was second temple period back, right? All of their audience came from the second temple period. So if you're going to truly understand the New Testament in context, you have to kind of step back and try to immerse yourself in the second temple period history and culture. And that answers a lot of questions. So that's very important. Okay, so how I first came to faith. My early life was immersed in Jewish study. I was training under rabbis to become an anti-missionary, someone who specialized in refuting Christianity and bringing Jews back to Judaism. My motivation wasn't to draw closer to God, it was to prove Christians wrong. I wanted to dismantle the faith I now defend. But as I pursued that goal, everything else in my life collapsed. My business failed, I went through bankruptcy, and my marriage dissolved. Stripped of status and comfort, I suddenly had time to think, to question, and ironically, to play trumpet gigs to pay the bills. One of those gigs changed everything. A church music minister who I knew and I had played for several years in special orchestras he put together, right? Knew I wasn't a believer, but he invited me to play in this new worship orchestra he was putting together to play every Sunday at services. He couldn't pay me, but he did buy breakfast each week, which I thought was nice. That small act of kindness began softening something in me. I played week after week, surrounded by people who genuinely worshipped God, not out of duty, but out of love. Eventually, I decided that if I was going to critique Christianity, I should understand it thoroughly. Right? I devoured every class the church offered and even enrolled in seminary courses. I challenged professors with all the objections I had been trained to raise, objections most couldn't adequately answer. Then I discovered the Messianic movement, where for the first time someone answered my questions in context. They showed me that there was no contradiction between the Tanakh and the New Testament, only misunderstandings caused by Gentile theology divorced from its Jewish roots. That revelation began my journey in faith in Yeshua and the Messiah. One of my favorite quotes: the more you study the scriptures, the more you will see the harmony between the Old and New Testaments. There is no contradiction, only misunderstanding. I believe that one completely. That came from Rabbi Yakel Eckstein. Now, Rabbi Eckstein, if you're not familiar, he founded the organization International Fellowship of Christians and Jews in 1983. I have been a supporter of that organization since about that time, deeply committed to both what he was doing and now that his daughter, who's taken it over since he passed, and the whole idea of Israel being part of God's message to the world. All right, so my early years in the Messianic movement were filled with unlearning and relearning. I began studying scriptures through a Hebraic structure and Second Temple thought, right? A lot of that came from Tim Hegg, who runs a Messianic ministry, okay? And I also started studying under Dr. Michael Heiser. right, who was an expert and really became prominent in the Divine Council worldview and Second Temple period Judaism. Right? So through my studying and through what I learned from them, I was able to see things like Genesis 1 not as a scientific claim, but as a theological declaration of Yahweh's sovereignty over chaos. That study opened my eyes. Creation was not about how long, but who reigns. God brings order from chaos. And that theme runs through all of Scripture, both in the cosmos and in my own life. Right? Over time, Dr. Heiser also expanded my viewpoint out quite a bit. His teaching reshaped how I understood the unseen realm, the rebellions of both divine and human beings, and the mission Messiah to reclaim all nations for Yahweh. My relationship with God has been further shaped by the rhythms of the biblical calendar. Shabbat, the festivals and sabbatical cycles. Trying to live by those as much as possible. The rhythms that God told his people to follow helps enlarge God's holiness in my life through service, worship, and prayer. Each cycle is not mere repetition. It's a spiral of growth, circling back to the same truths, but with deeper insights each time. Sorry. My relationship with God today. I would describe my relationship with God as covenantal and loyal. I see myself as one of his image bearers, called to reflect his nature on earth. Obedience is my act of worship, not to earn salvation, but as a declaration of loyalty. Torah observance, right, to me is a sign of that loyalty. It's not salvatory or legalistic. It's relational. It says, I belong to you and I walk in your ways. The Torah reveals God's character, his justice, mercy, and holiness. And through Yeshua, I can now walk in those same paths by the power of the Spirit. When people say to me, hey, the law was done away with, I would often respond with, did Jesus eat a ham sandwich? Didn't Paul tell his Gentile congregations to imitate him as he imitated Christ? So, what part of don't eat pork do you not understand? It's a lighthearted way to make a serious point. Yeshua didn't abolish the Torah. He embodied it perfectly. And not that you earn anything if you follow Torah, if you choose to. It is just your way of being loyal to what God has said. Because all believers are adopted sons of God, attached to the root that is Abraham. And if that doesn't make you Jewish, I don't know what does. Right? So, you don't have to follow Torah. You don't earn anything from it. But I think you learn a whole lot about God if you do. Okay? Alright, let's talk about God's guidance in my life. Because I clearly see God helping lead me. Right? So, a recent example of this guidance came when my wife and I realized it was time to leave Maine, where we lived. The cold was affecting my health, especially after a minor stroke that followed the mandatory COVID vaccine, and that's a whole nother story, right? We began looking in Florida and Texas, but nothing felt right. Then one day, a random YouTube video appeared about people moving halfway back to South Carolina, a place we hadn't even considered. Within weeks, we found the right home, and our house in Maine sold quickly. It was one of those moments where God quietly arranged everything, confirming his direction in unmistakable ways. So, how has faith shaped who I am? Faith has made me both humbler and bolder. It's given me a renewed sense of purpose as a teacher and theologian, but also the compassion that comes from having been wrong and redeemed. My calling now is to help others think biblically, to challenge lazy theology and inspire believers to dig deeply as the Bereans did. I no longer see theology as academic theory. It's discipleship. To know God rightly is to image him faithfully. So, what matters most? Well, what matters most to me is loyalty, remaining faithful to God's character and mission. We were never called to be mere consumers of sermons. We are called to be theologians of our own lives, to wrestle with Scripture, seek truth, defend it, and bear God's image in our world that has forgotten what that means. If my story has any purpose, it's this: to awaken others to their own divine calling, to study deeply, think critically, live loyally, and let every part of life reflect the holiness of the God who brings order from chaos. And Rabbit Room Apologetics is my teaching platform on YouTube, and also what I call my teaching platform on school. Thank you very much.